Most people trust their mind. They believe every thought they have must be true. Every doubt must be a warning. Every fear must mean something is wrong. But that's the mistake. Bruce Lee understood something most people never realize. Your mind is not designed to make you successful. It is designed to keep you safe. And sometimes, what feels like logic is actually fear wearing a smart disguise. So the real question is not, are you thinking correctly? The real question is, are you being controlled by your thoughts without even realizing it? Most people never question their mind, not even once. A thought appears and instantly they believe it. A feeling rises and immediately they obey it. There is no distance, no awareness, no control. And this is where everything begins to go wrong, because your mind was never designed to show you reality exactly as it is. It was designed to interpret reality based on what you have experienced before. Every fear you've ever felt, every failure you've ever faced, every moment you doubted yourself, your mind stores all of it. And then it uses that past to predict your future. So when a new opportunity appears, something unfamiliar, something uncertain, your mind doesn't say, "This could change your life." Instead, it says, "This could go wrong," not because it knows the truth, but because it remembers the pain. Bruce Lee understood this with brutal clarity. He knew that most thoughts are not based on present reality. They are echoes of the past, recycled fears, repeated doubts, old limitations, wearing new faces. And the more you listen to them without question, the more they shape your identity. You start to believe, "I am not confident, I am not ready, I am not capable." But those are not facts. They are patterns. Patterns your mind has repeated so many times that they now feel like truth. This is the illusion. Your mind speaks with confidence even when it is wrong. It tells you to stay safe, even when safety is the very thing keeping you stuck. It warns you about failure, but never reminds you of possibility. And slowly, without realizing it, you begin to live inside those limits, not because they are real, but because they feel real. Bruce Lee refused to accept this. He didn't silence his mind. He didn't try to eliminate thoughts completely. He simply stopped treating them as authority. He saw them for what they truly are: suggestions, not commands. This is where power begins. The moment you realize that just because you think something doesn't mean you have to believe it. The moment you pause and question, is this thought actually true, or is it just familiar? Because familiarity is dangerous. It feels comfortable. It feels safe. But it also keeps you exactly where you are. And if you never challenge your thoughts, you will never outgrow them. Your life will be controlled by patterns you didn't choose, decisions you didn't question, and fears you never confronted. So the real shift is not in your actions first, it's in your awareness. You must start watching your mind. Instead of blindly following it, notice how quickly it jumps to doubt. Notice how easily it creates negative outcomes. Notice how often it tries to slow you down. Not because you are weak, but because your mind prefers the known over the unknown, and growth always lives in the unknown. Bruce Lee trained his body with discipline, but his real mastery was over his awareness. He could see a thought without becoming it. He could feel fear without submitting to it. He could experience doubt without stopping his movement. And that is what made him different. Not just faster, not just stronger, but freer, because once you understand that your mind is not truth, you stop living inside its limits. And for the first time, you begin to see what is actually possible. Fear disguised as logic. Some people mästerhamba asojustorsis key. The most dangerous thoughts are not the loud ones. They are not the obvious fears that make your heart race. They are not the moments where you clearly feel afraid. Those are easy to recognize. The real danger comes from thoughts that feel calm, reasonable, intelligent, thoughts that sound like advice. Wait a little longer. You need more time. Don't rush. Be smart about this. And because they sound logical, you trust them. You don't question them. You don't challenge them. You follow them. But what you don't realize is, many of these thoughts are not logic at all. They are fear, perfectly disguised. Bruce Lee saw this pattern clearly. He understood that fear doesn't always show itself as panic. Sometimes it shows itself as over-analysis. Sometimes it hides behind perfectionism. Sometimes it speaks through delays that feel justified. And if you are not aware, you will spend your entire life listening to fear while believing you are being wise. Your mind is extremely intelligent. It knows that if it tells you directly, you're afraid, you might resist it, you might fight back. So instead, it changes its voice. It becomes calm, measured, rational. It tells you things that make sense on the surface, but slowly keep you exactly where you are. Think about how many times you've delayed something important, not because you didn't want it, but because your mind told you, not yet. And that not yet turned into weeks, then months, then years. Opportunities don't disappear suddenly. They fade while you are thinking. Bruce Lee refused to be controlled by this illusion. He didn't reject thinking completely, but he refused to let thinking become a cage. Because he understood a truth that most people avoid. Fear becomes powerful when it sounds intelligent. When fear is loud, you notice it. But when fear becomes logical, you obey it. And that is where people lose control of their lives. They don't fail because they are incapable. They fail because they hesitate. They delay. They wait for a level of certainty that will never arrive. Your mind will always try to create one more reason to wait, one more scenario to consider, one more risk to avoid, because uncertainty feels dangerous. But Bruce Lee understood something deeper. Uncertainty is not the enemy, it is the path. Every form of growth exists inside uncertainty. Every breakthrough, every transformation, every new level requires stepping into something unknown. But your mind doesn't like the unknown. It cannot control it, so it tries to pull you back into what feels safe, even if that safe place is limiting your entire life. This is why logic can be dangerous. Not real logic, but false logic. The kind that feels correct, but is actually protecting your comfort zone. The kind that convinces you to stay where you are while telling you it's the smart decision. Bruce Lee trained himself to see through this. He didn't just listen to what his mind said. He paid attention to why it was saying it. He asked, is this helping me grow, or is this helping me avoid discomfort? That one question changes everything. Because real logic pushes you forward. Fake logic holds you back. Real logic creates movement. Fake logic creates delay. Real logic leads to clarity. Fake logic leads to endless thinking. And most people live their entire lives inside fake logic. They convince themselves they are being careful, when in reality, they are being controlled. Controlled by fear they don't recognize, controlled by thoughts they never question, controlled by a mind that is trying to protect them, but in the process is limiting them. Bruce Lee broke this pattern, not by eliminating fear, but by exposing it. He saw that behind most hesitation, there is always one thing: fear of loss, fear of failure, fear of being judged. And once you see it clearly, it loses its disguise. It stops sounding like wisdom. It starts sounding like what it really is: a barrier, a limit, a voice trying to keep you small. This is the moment where you regain control. Not when fear disappears, but when you recognize it, even when it sounds intelligent. Because once you see it, you can choose to follow it or to move despite it. And that decision is what separates those who stay stuck from those who move forward without permission. Overthinking is control disguised as intelligence. Overthinking feels productive. That is why it is so dangerous. It gives you the illusion that you are doing something meaningful, that you are preparing, refining, improving your chances, but in reality, you are standing still. And the longer you stay in that state, the more powerful it becomes. Because overthinking is not just thinking too much. It is the loss of control over your own mind. At first, it looks harmless. You revisit a decision once, then again, then one more time, just to be sure. But slowly, something changes. You are no longer choosing to think. Thinking is choosing you. And that is the moment where most people don't realize they've already lost control. Bruce Lee understood this at a level most never reach. He saw that the human mind has a tendency to complicate what is simple, to add layers where none are needed, to turn a clear path into a maze. And once you are inside that maze, you don't move forward, you move in circles. Overthinking creates a false sense of depth. You start believing, I'm analyzing more than others, so I must be smarter. I'm considering every possibility, so I must be prepared. But Bruce Lee rejected this completely, because he understood something brutal. Clarity is simple. Confusion is complex. The more complex your thinking becomes, the further you move away from truth, because truth doesn't need endless analysis. Truth is direct. Action is direct. But overthinking is hesitation wearing the mask of intelligence. It keeps you busy in your own head, so you never have to face reality. And the mind is very clever at doing this. It creates endless what-if scenarios. What if this goes wrong? What if people judge me? What if I fail and can't recover? Each question feels important. Each scenario feels necessary. But none of them move your life forward. They only create weight, mental weight, the kind that slows you down, drains your energy, and makes even simple decisions feel overwhelming. Bruce Lee refused to carry this weight. He trained himself to cut through it, not by forcing his mind to stop, but by refusing to follow every path it created. Because your mind will always create more paths than necessary, more options, more doubts, more reasons to wait. But only one thing actually matters: movement. Without movement, all thinking becomes meaningless. You can analyze perfectly, plan perfectly, understand everything intellectually, and still go nowhere. This is why overthinking becomes a trap, because it replaces action with imagination. And imagination without action creates frustration. You start to feel stuck, not because you lack ability, but because you never move long enough to discover what you're capable of. Bruce Lee understood that action is not the result of perfect thinking. It is the result of decisiveness, the ability to move even when the mind is not fully settled. Because the mind will never be fully settled. There will always be another doubt, another possibility, another risk. If you wait for your mind to become completely clear, you will wait forever. And this is where most people lose years of their life. Not in failure, but in hesitation. Opportunities pass, chances disappear, time moves forward, and they remain in the same place, thinking, refining, waiting, believing that one more round of thinking will finally give them certainty. But certainty is an illusion. Bruce Lee knew this. He didn't wait for certainty. He moved with awareness. He accepted that clarity comes after action, not before it. And this is where real power begins. When you stop asking, "Is this the perfect decision?" and start asking, "Am I willing to move despite imperfection?" Because perfection is another trap created by the mind. It convinces you that things must be flawless before you begin. But perfection is not a starting point. It is a result, and it only comes through action, through mistakes, through adjustment, through real experience. Overthinking removes you from all of that. It keeps you safe from mistakes, but also from growth. Safe from failure, but also from success. And that is the trade. A life without risk for a life without progress. Bruce Lee refused that trade. He chose movement over perfection, simplicity over complexity, action over endless thought, because he understood something that most people avoid. The mind becomes stronger the more you obey it, and weaker the more you challenge it. Every time you act despite doubt, you take control back. Every time you move despite uncertainty, you break the pattern. Every time you stop overthinking and start doing, you remind your mind it is not in charge. And slowly, that changes everything. The noise becomes quieter, the hesitation becomes weaker, the clarity becomes sharper, not because your mind has disappeared, but because you are no longer trapped inside it. And once you reach that point, you don't just think differently, you live differently, because your life is no longer controlled by thoughts that never end, but by actions that actually move you forward. Detaching from your thoughts. Most people try to control their thoughts. They fight them, they argue with them, they try to replace negative thoughts with positive ones, but they never step back and ask the deeper question: who is the one noticing these thoughts? Because the moment you ask that, everything begins to change. You start to realize something uncomfortable, yet powerful. You are not your thoughts. You are the awareness behind them. And this is the line most people never cross. They spend their entire lives inside their mind, reacting, responding, obeying, without ever creating distance. Bruce Lee didn't just train his body to react faster, he trained his awareness to observe deeper. He understood that true control doesn't come from forcing the mind to be quiet. It comes from not being controlled by its noise. Because the mind will never be silent for long. It will always generate thoughts, some useful, some distracting, some completely misleading. And if your peace depends on your mind being quiet, you will never have peace. So Bruce Lee approached it differently. He didn't try to eliminate thoughts. He learned to detach from them, to see them without becoming them, to hear them without obeying them. This sounds simple, but it is one of the hardest disciplines a human can develop. Because your mind is convincing, it speaks with authority. It tells you, this is who you are, this is what will happen, this is what you should do, and without awareness, you believe it, you merge with it, you lose yourself inside it. Detachment breaks that pattern. It creates a space between you and your thoughts, a space where choice exists. Because before that space, there is no choice. There is only reaction. A thought appears and you follow. A fear rises and you stop. A doubt forms and you hesitate. But once you create distance, everything slows down. A thought appears and instead of reacting, you observe. You ask, is this useful? Is this real? Or is this just my mind repeating something old? And in that moment, you take your power back. Bruce Lee mastered this state. He could feel fear without becoming afraid. He could experience doubt without stopping his movement. He could hear the voice of hesitations and still act with clarity. This is not suppression. This is not denial. This is awareness, because suppression means you are still fighting the mind, and fighting the mind gives it importance, but observation removes its control. Think about it. A thought only has power if you believe it, if you follow it, if you act on it. But if you simply notice it and let it pass, it loses strength. It becomes just another passing moment, like a cloud moving across the sky, present, but not permanent. This is where most people struggle, because they are addicted to their thoughts. Even the negative ones. They replay them, they analyze them, they hold on to them, and without realizing it, they give them energy. Bruce Lee refused to feed unnecessary thoughts. He focused only on what was essential, only on what moved him forward. Everything else, he let go. And this is where simplicity becomes powerful, because the less you engage with useless thoughts, the clearer your mind becomes, not empty, but focused, not silent, but controlled. This is why detachment is not about doing less thinking. It is about choosing which thoughts deserve your attention, because attention is power. Where your attention goes, your energy follows. And where your energy goes, your life begins to shape itself. If your attention is always on doubt, your life will reflect hesitation. If your attention is always on fear, your life will reflect limitation. But if your attention is directed by awareness, not by automatic thinking, everything changes. Bruce Lee understood this deeply. He didn't allow random thoughts to guide his direction. He chose his focus. He chose his response. He chose his movement. And that choice came from detachment, from the ability to step back and see clearly, because clarity is not something you force. It is something that appears when the noise loses control over you. And the only way to reduce that noise is not to fight it, but to stop identifying with it. You are not your doubts. You are not your fears. You are not the voice in your head. You are the one who can observe all of it and still choose differently. This is freedom, not external freedom, not freedom from circumstances, but freedom from internal control. The kind of freedom that allows you to act, even when your mind is uncertain, to move, even when your thoughts are not perfect, to live without being trapped inside your own head. And once you reach this level, everything becomes simpler. Decisions become faster. Actions become clearer. Life becomes lighter. Not because challenges disappear, but because your mind no longer controls how you respond to them. And that is what made Bruce Lee different. Not just his speed, not just his strength, but his ability to remain free inside a mind that most people are trapped in. Because once you detach from your thoughts, you don't just think differently, you exist differently, with clarity, with control, and with a level of awareness that most people spend their entire lives trying to find. Arson destroys illusion, the breakpoint of control. There comes a moment where thinking must end, not because thinking is useless, but because beyond a certain point, thinking becomes the barrier. Most people never reach this realization. They believe the problem is lack of knowledge. They believe the problem is lack of clarity. They believe the problem is lack of preparation. But the truth is much simpler and much harder to accept. The problem is hesitation. Hesitation created by the mind, because the mind always wants one more layer of certainty, one more confirmation, one more guarantee, one more reason to feel safe before moving. And the dangerous part is, that moment never comes. Bruce Lee understood this with absolute precision. He knew that if you wait for the mind to feel completely ready, you will never act, because the mind is designed to detect risk, and where there is risk, there will always be doubt. So instead of waiting for doubt to disappear, he moved despite it. This is where most people break. They reach the edge of action, they feel the discomfort, they hear the voice of hesitation, and they step back, not because they can't move forward, but because they are listening to the wrong signal. They believe discomfort means danger. They believe uncertainty means stop. They believe fear means they are not ready. But Bruce Lee saw these signals differently. He saw discomfort as a sign of growth. He saw uncertainty as a doorway. He saw fear as a test of control. And because of that, he didn't stop. He moved. Action is not just movement. It is a direct challenge to illusion, because everything your mind creates, all the fears, all the imagined failures, all the worst-case scenarios, exist only in thought. They feel real. They look real. They seem logical. But they are not reality. They are projections. And projections cannot survive contact with action. The moment you act, something powerful happens. The illusion begins to collapse. What you feared rarely happens the way you imagined. What you avoided becomes manageable. What felt overwhelming becomes clear. Not because the situation changed, but because you stepped out of your mind and into reality. Bruce Lee didn't rely on imagination. He relied on experience, because experience cuts through doubt faster than any amount of thinking. You can think about something for months and still feel uncertain, but one moment of action can give you more clarity than all that time combined. This is why action is so powerful. It replaces assumption with truth. It replaces fear with feedback. It replaces hesitation with momentum. And momentum is something the mind cannot easily stop, because once you start moving, it becomes easier to continue. The hardest part is always the first step, not because the step itself is difficult, but because the mind resists it the most. It creates pressure. It creates doubt. It creates excuses that feel valid. Start tomorrow. Wait until you feel better. Prepare a little more. These are not random thoughts. They are strategies. Strategies your mind uses to delay action, while convincing you that delay is reasonable. Bruce Lee didn't negotiate with these thoughts. He didn't sit and debate with his mind. He acted, and through action, he trained his mind to follow, not lead. Because the truth is, your mind learns from your actions, not your intentions. You can tell yourself you are confident, but if you never act, your mind will not believe it. You can tell yourself you are ready, but if you keep delaying, your mind will reinforce hesitation. Action sends a signal, a clear message. I move, regardless of doubt. And once that pattern is repeated, your mind adapts. The voice of hesitation becomes weaker. The intensity of fear decreases. The need for perfect clarity fades, not because the mind disappears, but because it has been retrained. Bruce Lee built this discipline over time. He didn't wait to feel fearless. He acted while fear existed. He didn't wait for perfect conditions. He moved in imperfect ones. He didn't allow the mind to decide the moment. He decided the moment. and the mind followed. This is the shift from being controlled to taking control, because as long as your actions depend on how you feel, you will always be inconsistent. Some days you will move, some days you will hesitate, but when your actions are based on decision, not emotion, you become stable, you become reliable, you become dangerous in a way most people are not, because you are no longer reacting to your mind, you are directing it. And this is where illusion loses its power completely, because illusion depends on inaction. It grows in stillness, it expands in hesitation, but it collapses in movement. The moment you step forward, you step out of imagination and into reality, and reality is always clearer than the mind. Bruce Lee lived in this clarity. He didn't allow imagined outcomes to control real decisions. He acted, he adjusted, he refined through experience. And that is why his growth was fast. Because he was not trapped in endless thought. He was engaged in continuous action. And that is the difference between those who stay stuck in their mind and those who move forward in their life. One waits for certainty, the other creates it through action. One listens to hesitation, the other breaks it through movement. And in the end, only one of them progresses. Because no matter how powerful your thoughts are, they mean nothing until you move. And the moment you do, everything begins to change. Why most people never escape the mind? The invisible prison. Most people are not aware they are controlled. That is the most dangerous part. If someone is trapped in a physical prison, they know they are trapped. They feel the walls, they see the limits, they understand they cannot move freely. But the prison of the mind is different. There are no visible bars, no locked doors, no guards, and because of that, it feels like freedom. You wake up, you think, you decide, you act. It feels like control. But if you look deeper, you will notice a pattern, the same doubts repeating, the same fears returning, the same hesitation showing up again and again. Different situations, same internal response. And that is not coincidence. That is conditioning. Bruce Lee understood this early. He realized that most people are not thinking freely, they are thinking predictably. Their mind is not creating new responses, it is replaying old ones. Patterns formed through years of experience, through failure, through rejection, through embarrassment, through moments where they felt small. All of that becomes programming. And once something becomes a pattern, the mind repeats it automatically. You don't choose it. It appears fast, effortless, convincing, and because it appears so naturally, you assume it must be true. This is how the prison works. Not by force, but by familiarity. Because what is familiar feels safe, even if it is limiting, even if it is painful, even if it keeps you exactly where you are. The mind prefers the known over the unknown. And the known, even when it is negative, feels comfortable. So most people stay inside their patterns. They stay inside their identity. They say things like, "This is just who I am. I've always been like this. I can't change that." But Bruce Lee rejected this completely. He refused to accept a fixed identity. He refused to believe that past patterns define future outcomes. Because he understood something most people never question. Your personality is not permanent. It is practiced. Everything you repeat becomes stronger. Every thought you entertain becomes easier to think again. Every hesitation you obey becomes harder to break. This is how people become trapped, not in one moment, but through repetition, small decisions, repeated daily, until they become automatic. And once something is automatic, it feels like truth, but it is not truth. It is habit. Bruce Lee trained himself to break habits, not just physical habits, but mental ones. He didn't allow his mind to run on autopilot. He stayed aware, because awareness is the only thing that interrupts patterns. Without awareness, you repeat. With awareness, you can choose, and choice is where freedom begins. But here is where it becomes difficult. Because breaking patterns is uncomfortable. It requires going against what feels natural. It requires acting differently when everything inside you wants to react the old way. It requires stepping into uncertainty when your mind is pulling you back to safety. This is why most people never escape. not because they are weak, but because they avoid discomfort. They choose familiarity over growth. They choose safety over expansion. They choose predictable pain over uncertain possibility. Bruce Lee chose differently. He understood that growth requires friction. It requires tension. It requires moments where you feel unsure, unstable, exposed. But instead of avoiding these moments, he moved into them, because he knew the only way to break a pattern is to interrupt it with action, not once, but repeatedly, because one action does not change identity. Consistency does. You cannot think your way into a new life. You must act your way into it. And every time you act differently, you send a signal to your mind. This is the new standard. Slowly, the old pattern weakens. The automatic response fades. The familiar reaction loses its strength, and something new begins to form. But this process requires discipline, because your mind will resist. It will try to pull you back. It will say, "This isn't you. This feels wrong. Go back to what you know." And if you listen, you return to the prison. But if you continue, despite that resistance, something shifts. You begin to realize that uncomfortable feeling was not danger. It was change, and change is exactly what the mind tries to avoid. This is why awareness is power, because once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. Once you recognize the repetition, you can no longer pretend it is random. Once you understand that your thoughts are conditioned, you stop treating them as absolute. Bruce Lee lived with this awareness. He didn't identify with every thought that appeared. He didn't accept every emotion as truth. He observed, he questioned, he chose, and through that, he remained free, not because his mind was perfect, but because it did not control him. Most people wait for a breakthrough moment, a sudden realization, a perfect day where everything changes. But that is another illusion. Change is not a moment. It is a process of awareness, followed by action, repeated until it becomes identity. And the longer you wait, the stronger the old patterns become. The deeper the conditioning sets in, the harder it feels to change. But here is the truth. It is never actually hard to change. It is just unfamiliar, and the mind resists what is unfamiliar. But unfamiliar is where growth exists. Unfamiliar is where new identity is built. Unfamiliar is where freedom begins. Bruce Lee stepped into that space constantly. He didn't stay where he was comfortable. He didn't repeat what was easy. He evolved. He adapted. He redefined himself again and again, because he refused to live inside a fixed version of who he was. And that is the final realization most people avoid. You are not stuck. You are repeating. And repetition can be broken, not by thinking differently alone, but by acting differently, consistently, because your mind will always try to keep you where you are. But you have the ability to move beyond it. And the moment you do, the prison begins to disappear. Not all at once, but piece by piece, pattern by pattern, thought by thought, until one day, you are no longer living inside your mind. You are directing it. And that is freedom, not the absence of thoughts, but the absence of control. Because once your mind no longer decides your limits, your life no longer follows old patterns. It follows your decisions. And that is where everything changes. In the end, everything comes down to one decision. Not a big decision, not a dramatic moment, a quiet, invisible choice that happens every single day. Do you follow your mind, or do you lead it? Most people never realize they are making this choice. They assume their thoughts are guiding them correctly. They assume their feelings are signals they must obey. They assume their hesitation is wisdom. But what they don't see is, every time they follow a thought without questioning it, they reinforce control. They strengthen the very thing that limits them. Bruce Lee understood this at the deepest level. He knew that mastery is not about controlling the world. It is about controlling your response to it, because you cannot stop thoughts from appearing. You cannot prevent doubt from entering your mind. You cannot eliminate fear completely, but you can decide what happens next. And that decision is where power exists, because your mind will always speak. It will always generate opinions, predictions, warnings, doubts. It will tell you what could go wrong. It will remind you of past failures. It will try to keep you within what feels safe. And if you listen blindly, your life will shrink slowly, quietly, without you even noticing. You will avoid risks. You will delay action. You will settle for less than what you are capable of. Not because you lack ability, but because your mind has convinced you to stay small. This is how people lose their potential, not in one moment, but through thousands of small decisions. Decisions where they choose comfort over growth, safety over expansion, familiarity over possibility. Bruce Lee refused this pattern. He didn't aim to remove fear. He aimed to remove its authority, because fear without control is just a feeling. But fear with control becomes a limitation, and most people give it that control. They allow a single thought to stop them, a single doubt to slow them down, a single fear to change their direction, and over time, that becomes identity. I'm not confident, I'm not ready, I'm not that type of person. But Bruce Lee saw identity differently. He saw it as something fluid, something that can change, adapt, evolve, not something fixed, not something permanent, because identity is not what you think, it is what you repeatedly do. And if your actions are controlled by your mind, your identity will reflect your limitations. But if your actions are controlled by your decisions, your identity will reflect your growth. This is where most people struggle. They wait to feel different before they act differently. They wait for confidence, they wait for clarity, they wait for certainty. But Bruce Lee understood something most never accept. You don't act because you feel ready. You feel ready because you act. Confidence is not a prerequisite. It is a result. Clarity is not a starting point. It is a byproduct. And certainty is something the mind will never fully give you. So if you are waiting for these things, you are waiting for something that does not exist. And while you wait, time moves, opportunities pass, life continues, and your mind keeps you exactly where you are. This is why mastery requires discipline. Not discipline of effort alone, but discipline of awareness, the ability to catch a thought before it becomes a decision, the ability to notice fear before it becomes hesitation, the ability to pause and choose a different response, because without that pause, there is no control. There is only reaction, and reaction is automatic. It is fast, it is familiar, it feels natural, but it is not freedom. Freedom is choosing even when the automatic response is strong. Freedom is acting even when the mind resists. Freedom is moving even when you feel uncertain. Bruce Lee lived in that state, not perfectly, but consistently. He didn't eliminate the voice in his head. He simply stopped allowing it to decide his direction. And over time, that changed everything. Because the more you lead your mind, the more it adapts. The resistance becomes weaker. The hesitation becomes shorter. The doubt becomes quieter. Not because it disappears, but because it is no longer in control. And this is where real power begins. When your actions are no longer dependent on your thoughts, when your movement is no longer controlled by your feelings, when your life is no longer dictated by internal noise. Because at that point, you become stable, consistent, unstoppable, in a way most people cannot understand. Not because you are fearless, but because fear no longer decides for you. Not because you are always confident, but because lack of confidence does not stop you. Not because your mind is silent, but because it is no longer leading. This is the difference between ordinary and exceptional. Ordinary people wait for the right feeling. Exceptional people create the right action. Ordinary people follow their thoughts. Exceptional people question them. Ordinary people stay within their limits. Exceptional people move beyond them, even when it feels uncomfortable. Bruce Lee didn't become legendary because of talent alone. He became legendary because he refused to be controlled internally. He understood that the greatest battle is not external, it is within, and most people lose that battle daily, without even realizing it. They lose when they hesitate. They lose when they doubt themselves unnecessarily. They lose when they obey fear without question. But that loss is not permanent. It can be reversed at any moment with a single decision, a decision to act instead of hesitate, a decision to move instead of overthink, a decision to lead instead of follow. And the more you make that decision, the stronger it becomes, until one day it is no longer a struggle. It is your nature. You no longer need motivation. You no longer need perfect clarity. You no longer need the mind to agree with you. You simply act, and that is where mastery is complete. Not when the mind disappears, but when it becomes a tool instead of a master, because your mind is powerful. It can help you think, plan, create, understand, but only if it is under your control. If not, it will limit you, quietly, consistently, completely. So the final truth is simple. You will either live by your thoughts, or you will rise above them. You will either be guided by fear, or you will move despite it. You will either stay inside your mental patterns, or you will break them through action. And that choice is yours. Every single day, every single moment, because your life is not decided by what you think. It is decided by what you do when your thoughts try to stop you. And once you understand this, once you truly see it, once you begin to apply it, there is no going back. Because you are no longer living inside your mind, you are directing it. And when that happens, your limits disappear, your hesitation fades, your potential expands. And for the first time, you are not just existing, you are in control. So now you see it clearly. Your biggest enemy was never the world. It was never other people. It was never lack of opportunity. It was the voice inside your own mind. The voice that tells you to wait. The voice that tells you you're not ready. The voice that sounds logical, but keeps you small. Bruce Lee understood this truth long before most people ever question it. Your mind can guide you, but it can also trap you. And the difference between those who stay stuck and those who become unstoppable is not talent, it is control. Control over what you believe, control over what you follow, control over what you do, despite what you feel. Because at the end of the day, your thoughts don't define you, your fears don't define you, your doubts don't define you, your actions do. So the next time your mind tries to stop you, pause, not to overthink, not to analyze, but to choose. Choose to move, choose to act, choose to lead instead of follow. Because the moment you stop obeying your mind blindly is the moment you take your life back. And once you take it back, everything changes. You move faster, you think clearer, you live freer, not because your mind is silent, but because it is no longer in control. And that is the real power, not fighting the mind, not escaping it, but mastering it. Because once you master your mind, you don't just change your thoughts, you change your entire future.